is paper slides, paper version, so if you want to take notes when you distribute the presentations, just pass around. So the order of our today's presentations will be, risk management practices, enterprise risk management, and since operational risk is one of the risks which is less managed, at least we'll show the results of the survey that EY conducted globally, and we'll see that it's one of the risks that companies pay less attention to. Therefore, we'll also pay attention to operational risk, which is part of the whole framework of enterprise risk management. And at the end of the presentation, we'll touch upon Basel and solvency implementation in Latvia. Recently conducted one survey, and as you see, the findings of this survey were that 42% of the companies say that they have gaps in risk coverage. So it's global companies that say that they have gaps in risk coverage. And what's important that 4 in 10 companies say that they do not formally link their risk management practices to business strategy. So I will touch upon this later in the presentation, but here is an important point that in order to make risk management practices and the risk management framework effective, it has to be linked to business strategy. So that's also what kind of companies point out that there's better alignment needed between risk management functions and business management functions. And what is even more important, and what we see in what we see especially last year, is an increase in regulatory pressure and an increase in regulatory requirements. And even more increase is expected, and companies also indicate this. If we see, for example, what happened a number of years ago when there was a collapse of Enron, so we thought that it's a huge magnitude of events. What we see lately, so we see that risk management is never enough, and probably regulators will put even more pressure on companies due to late wins as well. Therefore, companies also plan to increase their investment in risk management practices, and they plan it to do not only in the long term but also in the short term. So in the survey that EY conducted, companies indicated that they plan investments, plan a huge increase in investments into risk management over the next 3 years period. That's also what the results of the survey were, and companies indicated that the role of risk management and the role of CEO, CFO, and the board have changed dramatically. And now CEO, CFO, and the board are much more accountable for risk management. Earlier, they were accountable as well, and they were those persons or those functions that were called accountable for risk management practices. But what companies indicated is that now CEOs, CFOs, and the boards are now much more aware of risk management practices, and they focus on risk management practices much more than they used to be. So there is this personal awareness of these positions and these functions have increased. So there's an increase in awareness, and it's already in place. So So, and here's interesting to see where the companies indicated they have gaps in their risk coverage. And as you see, operational risk is the first one, strategic risk is the second one, and competitive risk is the third one. So, as if operational risk is what happens in our everyday processes with our regarding people who work in the company. But it's, as mentioned by the survey respondents, it's one of the risks that companies cover less. So what are the movements in the risk management practices if we describe overall trend of risk management development? So as it is shown on the slide, most companies are there in the left corner. So, and if we look at the shareholders' value and how risk management sophistication growth was done, so an ideal case is that the companies are there when are here in this right corner when risk management practices are expected to be integrated into the business processes of the companies. So what do we want to achieve with risk management? So there are two basic things that we want to achieve. We want to keep the company out of trouble, which means that we also want to comply with standards that a particular company has to comply with. And we have to comply with regulatory requirements. And the other important block, what we want to do with the risk, management practices, we want to make our business better. In ideal case, risk management practices should be integrated with the business processes, and they should facilitate and make everyday business processes more efficient and more effective. So it's not only regulatory compliance, it's not only observing the standards, observing the rules, but it's also this touch of business processes of the company. So, and lately, therefore, there is much more attention paid to enterprise framework against which they can benchmark their risk practices. And they want to establish a framework that covers the whole organization, covers all processes in the organization. Therefore, ERM is what is now supposed to give integration of this risk management practices with the existing business processes of the company. And that's what differentiates ERM from other models, so that it's the core thing about the core issue of risk management and companies seek for about ERM is that it integrates into the business processes. But as you see on this slide, ERM, if it's established in the company, it has to be practical, as it's shown here. So it should not be in this lower left corner. It should not be academic, and it should be practical. It should be orientated to everyday operations of the companies, and it should be leveraged with business processes of the companies. So it's ERM is an organization competency to manage uncertainty and more effectively minimizing the threats and maximizing the opportunity. Stress that it should cover the whole organization, and it's the way how we assess risk, how we measure risk, how we firstly identify the risk, how we identify the risks, how we measure the risks, how we monitor. So it covers, I want to monitor the risks. touch upon models which could be used in the organization, and the most popular models for applying year-round. What are the business advantages of putting year-round in place in organizations? What's interesting to find out is that also EY survey results indicated that investors, 82% Flush investors that were surveyed, they indicated that they would be ready to pay a premium for companies that demonstrate effective risk practices. So investors also put a lot of emphasis on risk management practices. If we look at rating companies such as Standard & Poor's, we also see that lately in the last years they have included not only quantitative factors in their risk management standards, but they have also included qualitative factors. So risk management is not only about quantifying the risk, but it also has this qualitative, qualitative aspects, qualitative factors. So the first thing that was mentioned, that companies want to have greater stability, and as a result also companies want to have greater profitability. So here that companies mention as benefits of or business advantages of year-round. So it's avoiding surprises, better corporate governance of companies, better decision making, because if we identify the risks, measure them correctly, so strategic decisions and business decisions are also linked to information that we get from measuring the risks. And efficiencies is the way we integrate risk management into business operations, and how we make the basic issues, business processes, everyday business processes more effective. So it's Ernst&Young approach to year-round. So 3 pillars, the main block, so to say. It's based on processes, infrastructure, and culture. So firstly, there needs to be culture set for risk management practices, management of the company, board, internal audit function should set the tone at the top. There should also be continuous learning in the organization regarding risk management practices. So that the risk management culture is embedded in the organizations, in operation of the organization. So infrastructure, here it says that key elements need to be in place in order to make this machine work. So it's for example, CROs, Chief Risk Officer, risk committees, internal audit function. There should be right people that are able to identify the risks, to measure the risks, and to, as a result of risk management practices, company design controls which would help the company to measure the risks. So, and these are the processes which I already partly mentioned. So it's risk assessment, risk management, monitoring, setting controls in place, reporting to management, executive board, reporting across the organization. So if we go a bit deeper into the model of risk management, so this part, executive management board, audit committee, and risk committee, these are the persons, the functions that set the business strategy of the company. So they set the business drivers and initiatives for the companies. When business drivers and initiatives are identified, the company should identify and measure the risks, and here are the main categories. So it's strategic, operational, financial, and compliance risks. When risks are identified, so here is the approach which shows that what we do with the risks. We assess the risks, we improve if there are any controls lacking, so we improve internal control system, and what we do regularly, what we do on average. So, and these processes, this approach applies to both business units and business functions. Well, it concerns the core functions in the company, and also the support functions in the company. These functions, like internal audit, compliance function, internal controls group, or other risk functions that are present in the company, they also help the executive management board, audit committee, and risk management to set this tone at the top and to make risk management practices work. But in order to make all this risk management practices work, risk management components needs to be in place. As I mentioned before, corporate governance corporate governance should be in place. Risk management strategy, and that's also what's important, that companies, for example, do not have, as indicated in the surveys, companies, for example, majority of companies do not have operational risk management strategy. So reporting and communication processes should be put in place. Usually there are some tools and technologies that are used to measure the risks and, well, overall culture. And here's what we mentioned. This framework at the same time makes our business better, and it keeps us out of trouble and helps us to achieve business objectives. So it's a theoretical framework of how risk management practices should work. But one of the challenges was implementation of ERM in the organization. Quite often it's quite difficult to integrate all in one, and to what is the most important thing is not always easy to integrate risk management practices into business unit operation, business unit strategies. ERM needs to be both qualitative and both quantitative. So we need to measure the risks, but we also need to pay attention to qualitative factors. And also, well, as regards Basel II and Solvency II requirements, well, now when banks and insurance companies are required to perform capital adequacy calculations, this is also the point in time when companies could also improve their ERM practices, well, enterprise risk management practices that cover the whole organization. So, and as I said before, so we'll touch upon operational risks. I will not go into much details, which Tomas will touch upon in his presentation, but why we want to cover this operational risk management part out of the whole enterprise risk management framework. As indicated earlier, well, operational risk is at large and undiscovered. Well, on a daily basis, we monitor the exaggerated but largely an undiscovered world. So at least companies indicate that they have gaps in managing operational risks. So Operational risks refer to processes, people, systems, and external events. And what will be interesting, so the standard, or we call Standard & Poor's, gives definition of operational risk management, and they, well, it includes the legal risk, but it excludes strategic and reputational risk. However, these are the survey results which EY conducted, and it was offered to survey participants to describe what they understand by operational risks. And what we see in this slide, that exactly if we look at the standard definition of operational risk, that strategic risk, for example, is also included in operational risks. It's how survey participants understood this. So it means that there is now also unified understanding of what is operational risk. So strategic and operational and reputational risk. So these are the potential models that could be used in the organization to manage operational risks. So there are three potential models. It's centralized model, decentralized, and hybrid model. Hybrid model is the most popular and which is more often used by the organization. So centralized model is when risk management functions set the tone and push risk management practices to business unit level. Decentralized strategy is when each business unit has its own risk management, and there is a person in business units that is responsible for identification risks in a particular business unit. Hybrid model is that both there is both risk management function and also special people are dedicated in business units. So it's both, it has elements from the centralized model and it has elements from the decentralized model. But it's the most resource-intensive model. So, and if we look at operational risk framework, it has the elements. It has the elements of enterprise risk management. So it's the operational risk foundation for operational risk management. It's also risk identification and assessment, risk measurement, and risk monitoring. Operational risks, measuring operation. And here we also see risks should also help the organization to make strategic decisions and to decide about business initiatives. So measurement of operational risks should help us to make the strategic decisions and business initiatives. These are the blocks which show, well, these are not the only options, the only approaches or methods how operational risks could be measured, but these are the most common approaches. These approaches are also used to calculate the capital adequacy. So, and risk reporting, it's here it's linked to all the to this central graph. So risk reporting in a developed organization very often includes elements of both of all these risk management approaches, and this risk measurement approaches could be used simultaneously to validate results that are received using different methods. So if we look at the one of the popular methods, loss data or internal and external data. So basically, that's what happens, that we have our basic systems, we have our basic, our business processes, where we get the information from. And so we register the incidents, and information that is used regarding the incidents is used to calculate the economic capital. And the data we get here is often used for example, backtesting of key indicators. So key indicators is more a proactive approach. So when we identify what could lead to operational risks, and usually we identify the number of these key indicators is not dramatic. So we should not develop and identify hundreds of key indicators. So information that we get here, so it's also used for risk and control assessment validation and for development of scenarios. So this is one of approaches which is so to say a proactive approach. And as I said, that when company defines key indicators, these are like early warnings, early indicators, signs, which we define what would help us to identify operational risks. And key users of this key indicators reports are usually board, senior management, internal audit function, and by business units. Risk and control self-assessment is also one of the methods, one of the approaches that is often used by the companies. When companies have their business processes, so they identify the risk, they measure the apparent risk, then they test the controls and see what controls they have in place to mitigate the risk, to prevent risk from happening. Then the control is tested and we see how efficient is the control, and what is then after application of this control, what is the residual risk. And we design action plans on how to improve the control in order to mitigate or prevent the risk. So, and here is an example of how, for example, companies that integrate all three approaches, how they also to say, or operational risk management reporting could look like. So it's it combines all three approaches. So it's risk and control, self-assessment, key indicators, and loss data. Loss data from both internal systems and both from external systems. You could also have risk assessment from other, like SOX assessment or other findings, which leads to overall operational risk assessment. So what we got is operational risk assessment. Companies often consider implementing implementing information system solutions in order to capture information regarding operational. In this case, well, it's already regarding the incidents that happen that help us to predict for the future. So, and when choosing an information system, what's important that, and what also in a survey that EY conducted, what is important when implementing a system is the scalability of the system, and what was also indicated by the survey participant that it was important for them to have not a one-time system rollout, but a phased rollout of the system. And also what was important is user training and user training for different groups, for different categories of users that use the system. So, and The last part of the presentation will be on Basel II insolvency to Basel II board as requirements for calculating capital calculating capital that is required for banks and solvency II for insurance companies. So Basel II is already in place, and it's already what companies, what banks should do starting from 2008. So those banks that got historical data and based their models of calculating capital requirements based on internal ratings, they already in this process were for a number of years at least, because they had to collect data at least for 3 years period. So it's the basic model which shows the pillars of Basel II, but I will not go into much detail regarding these pillars, because most probably in your everyday work you are much more into these processes. So, but when measuring minimal capital requirements, the companies have to consider credit risk, operational risk, market risk, and interest rate risk. And companies, banks choose which approaches they would use in order to measure credit risk and operational risk. And that's what happened. What is to take place already in 2008? That banks should evaluate risk management practice they have in place, how they measure risks, how they calculate the minimal capital requirements, and it's already time for the regulator to check how banks have set up the system and to check the self-assessment made by banks. So regarding solvency requirements, it is to take place in 2011, or maybe even what often is discussed. Maybe it's even later than 2011, but it's usually better not to postpone till the last moment and to start thinking about this in 2011, but to start thinking proactively and to start thinking about this before. Especially concerns smaller companies when they assess, at least what we heard from our clients. Well, smaller companies assess what is required from them, so they say that for smaller companies these capital requirements are rather difficult. Well, it will be rather difficult to implement and rather difficult to observe. So that's we'll briefly discuss progress, topicalities, and problems with implementation of Basel and Solvency II requirements in Latvia and in the Baltics. So banks have already developed approaches to calculation minimum capital requirements, and as also mentioned earlier, banks now are further along the journey of calculating minimum capital requirements in comparison to insurance companies, because for banks it's already in place. For insuring companies, there is time for improvement, time for setting their internal models. What we have heard from our clients and what we see from publicly available information, from information available from the regulator, is that banks, majority of banks have started with using the standardized approach. So it's, which means, well, maybe considered not that sophisticated approach to setting this risk management risk measurement in order to calculate minimum capital requirements. Some banks have used a more complicated approach. It's internal risk-based approach, but if we compare, well, the total bank's assets, it turns out that in Latvia and in Lithuania, since the largest banks developed this internal ratings-based approach, the assets held by the banks will be, the majority of assets held by the banks will be assessed using the ERB approach. So that these was what concerned credit risks. For operational risks, banked in the order of preference in the descending sequence, the approaches used are the basic indicator approach, the standardized approach, and the advanced measurement approach. So the most popular one has been the standardized approach, also, and so the majority of the bank's assets will be assessed by using the standardized approach. But since this Basel II Basel II requirements is a new thing for the Baltics and both for banks, insurance companies, and the regulator. So what we want to stress here that everybody is now in the process of learning. So both banks and the regulator is also learning on how to do these things. So hands-on experience is only being developed, and what the regulator now will do when assessing how banks have calculated their minimum capital requirements, how they have set up their models to calculate minimum capital requirements. Banks regulator also needs more time to assess more sophisticated models. So what we have also seen from our clients, that's and what our clients say, that's banks paid more. Banks and insurance companies historically paid more attention to credit risk and to measuring credit risk, interest rate risk, and market risk. Operational risk is so to say a new thing, because, well, under Basel I requirements, operational risk was not required to be measured, and, well, as mentioned before in the presentation and as illustrated by survey results, operational risk is an area where companies, even global companies, which huge turnovers indicate that they have gaps in their risk coverage and their risk management practices. Therefore, measurement of operational risks, well, at least if we look at the Baltics, is not at a very advanced level. What we also heard from the clients when setting up this models for calculation of minimum risk requirements, what risk management function employees say to what's important, what would be important for them, that's bank's board risk management function pay attention to sophisticated business processes, for example, for banks it would be treasury or dealing, because these are the functions these are the business processes that risk management functions board are least aware of, well, have least understanding of. When the models are developed, it's very important to test these models, and that's what was also emphasized in the presentation. That's what the banks do, and that's what the regulator has to do starting from 2008. One of the questions for banks when they had to develop their systems, had to develop the approach, had to choose the approach for measuring risks in order to calculate minimum capital requirements. Why on earth to strive and to try to develop a sophisticated approach to measuring risks? Because, well, if we measure risks more precisely, our capital requirements would be higher. But there has been a number of research made, and here's one fifth qualitative impact study, which was conducted. So this SEPS Group 1 includes European banks, and if we compare, well, for example, approaches used and change in minimum requirements, so we see that, if, for example, if advanced internal rate based internal rate capital required or capital set aside is less than, for example, standardized approaches. So it could be said shows that capital requirements provide an incentive for banks on average to move to the more advanced approaches. It will lead to lower capital set asides. So, and amongst the problems that we heard our clients mentioning, for example, our audit clients, the development of their internal models, choosing the approach, is that it was quite difficult to accumulate statistical data. It was also difficult to do this with people that were in place, so it was needed for senior staff and management. And also what our clients say now, that probably that information, historical information, so capital requirements are low was gathered well, in the period of economic frost. Therefore, if this historical information where the first impression is that were gathered well now, then the capital therefore if requirements could be higher than they are calculated now. In ideal case, well, it's mentioning regarding historical data should cover the full economic cycle. So, and what our clients also say regarding this, regarding choosing the approaches and regarding measuring the risks, that operational risk is currently much more additional education, less measured and less modeled than other categories of risk, because as indicated before in the presentation, so banks are much, for example, banks are much more used to measuring credit risk, market risk, interest rate risk than operational risk. So it's the introduction, well, so to say, the theoretical framework, and we'll in a short time we'll continue with more practical approaches. Well, here it was the general introduction regarding enterprise risk management practices, operational risk management practices, and a bit on Basel II insolvency requirements. The second part will be more practical part. So when Tomas will show one of the solutions that is possible to implement for operational risk management, and the third part, it will be SWEDBANK's representatives will share their experience in developing operational risk management model and calculated business requirements. If you have any questions